Every ending is a beautiful neon requiem, a glowing tribute to the journey we have shared and the lessons we've learned. Join us as we close this chapter with style and prepare for the next big revelation. Subscribe today and witness the beauty of a perfect cinematic resolution. I retired on a Tuesday, not because I had to, not because my knees finally gave out, or my eyes couldn't read the blueprints anymore. I retired because after 38 years of running a small but steady civil engineering firm, I had earned the right to drink my coffee slowly. My name is Howard. I am 63 years old. I live alone in the same house I built with my own hands in 1991 on a quiet street in Bend, Oregon, where the ponderosa pines grow tall enough to block the afternoon sun, and the winters are cold enough to remind you that comfort is something you have to maintain. My son Daniel is 31. He has my jawline and his mother's eyes, which is the kind of thing you notice more after your wife is gone. Carol passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. The kind that moves fast and leaves you standing in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, wondering how a person could be so present at dinner on Friday and so completely absent by the following Thursday. Daniel was 23 when we lost her. Old enough to grieve like a man. Young enough that it broke something in him he spent years trying to rebuild. We were close after that. Closer than most fathers and sons, I think. We had dinner every other Sunday. He called on weekdays sometimes, just to talk, the way Carol used to call her own father. I coached his little league team when he was 9. I taught him to change his own oil, to read a topographic map, to shake a man's hand, and look him in the eye. I am not telling you this to paint myself as a perfect father. I made mistakes. I worked too many late nights. I missed a school play once that I still think about. But I loved my son thoroughly and without condition. And I truly believed that he knew that. Then he met Amber. I want to be fair here. I want to be the kind of man who gives people the benefit of the doubt. Carol always said I was too quick to form opinions about people, that I read a room the way I read a survey map, looking for faults before I looked for solid ground. So when Daniel brought Amber home for the first time, about 2 years ago now, I made a conscious effort. I smiled. I shook her hand. I cooked the pot roast Carol's mother taught me to make. I asked questions. I listened. She was 34. Pretty in a deliberate kind of way, the way some people are always slightly performing. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, which meant she drove a leased car and wore clothes that cost more than my monthly utility bills. She laughed at the right moments and complimented my house sincerely enough that I noticed she was measuring the ceilings. That last part I told myself I was imagining. Over the following months, she and Daniel became serious quickly. Too quickly, in the way that sometimes means two people are genuinely right for each other, and sometimes means one person has found what they were looking for and is moving before the other one thinks to ask questions. By month 4, they were living together in Daniel's apartment across town. By month 7, she was referring to my Sunday dinners as Daniel's family obligation, which he relayed to me with an apologetic shrug that I chose not to read into. The first time something felt genuinely wrong was last November. Daniel and I had plans to watch the game together, just the two of us, the way we had done for years. He canceled 2 hours before kickoff. Amber had made dinner reservations, he said, a place she'd been wanting to try. He sounded slightly embarrassed and slightly annoyed, but not annoyed enough. When I said, "No problem, we'll reschedule," I heard her voice in the background, bright and smooth, saying something I couldn't make out. Daniel laughed at whatever it was. It was not a laugh I recognized. I started paying closer attention after that. I am an engineer. Paying attention is how I was trained to move through the world. What I noticed, over the next several months, was a pattern of quiet removal. I was no longer automatically included in plans. Invitations to my house for dinner became less frequent and then stopped. When I called Daniel, the conversations were shorter and ended with a vagueness I found unsettling. "I'll talk to Amber and see," or "We've got some stuff going on this week." Carol's photograph, which had sat on the bookshelf in Daniel's apartment since the year she died, was gone the last time I visited. When I asked about it, Daniel said he thought it was in a box somewhere, that they were redecorating. That was in March. In April, Daniel told me he and Amber were engaged. I congratulated him, sincerely. Whatever my private feelings about Amber were at that point, my son was happy, or appeared to be, and I was not going to be the father who poisons that well. I took him to dinner, just the two of us, at the Italian place on Wall Street where we used to go when he was in high school. We split a bottle of Chianti, and he talked about the future with the kind of open excitement I hadn't seen from him in a while. He looked like himself that night. I held on to that. The engagement party was held at Amber's parents' home in Portland. Her family was large and loud and pleasant enough on the surface. Her father, a man named Greg, sold commercial real estate. Her mother organized charity galas. They had the particular ease of people who have never had to worry seriously about money, which I don't hold against anyone. What I noticed was the way Amber moved through the room, working it, really, touching arms, tilting her head, laughing precisely when laughter was most useful. She was very good at people. That can be a wonderful quality. That night, watching her, I was not certain it was. Greg pulled me aside near the end of the evening. He was on his third or fourth bourbon and had the loose geniality of a man who mistakes frankness for intimacy. "Daniel tells me you've done well for yourself," he said. "Engineering firm, property, the whole picture." He smiled. "Amber has great taste in families." I smiled back. I thought about what he said for a long time afterward. The thing about having spent 38 years reading structural assessments is that you develop an instinct for what is holding weight and what is about to fail. I could not point to a single piece of evidence in those early months. I had a feeling in my chest, the same feeling I get when I look at a foundation plan and something in the load distribution is slightly off. Nothing you can see yet, but something that will eventually make itself known. I decided to stop waiting for it to make itself known on its own. I want to be clear about why I did what I did next. I was not trying to break up my son's relationship. I was not acting out of jealousy or loneliness, or the irrational possessiveness that some fathers develop toward their children. I was a man who had spent 40 years solving problems by gathering accurate information first. And I had a feeling, a quiet, persistent, structural feeling that something in this foundation was wrong. I hired a private investigator in May. Her name was Patricia Reynolds. She operated out of a converted office above a running shoe store on Newport Avenue, which is the kind of location that either means you are just starting out or you are good enough that you don't need to impress anyone. She had a direct manner and a whiteboard behind her desk, covered in color-coded timelines that made me feel immediately that I was in the right place. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. What specifically concerned me, what I was hoping to find or not find, and how much documentation I wanted if she did find something. I told her I wanted to know the truth, whatever it was, and that I was prepared for any version of it. She called me 6 weeks later and asked me to come in. I sat across from her desk on a Thursday afternoon in June while she walked me through what she had found. She set a manila folder on the desk between us and opened it with the unhurried precision of someone who has delivered difficult news many times and understands that the pacing matters. Amber had been engaged before, twice. The first engagement, 7 years ago, ended 14 months in. The man's name was Scott. He was a software engineer from Seattle with a substantial stock portfolio and a family trust. The relationship ended shortly after Scott's father updated his estate plan in a way that significantly reduced Scott's anticipated inheritance. Patricia had a copy of a letter from Scott's attorney to his family's estate planner, time-stamped 3 weeks before Amber ended the engagement. The second engagement, 4 years ago, was to a man named Richard in Sacramento. Richard was the sole heir to a regional chain of hardware stores his grandfather had built. That engagement lasted 11 months. It ended 2 weeks after Richard's mother remarried, an event that introduced a prenuptial agreement which restructured Richard's inheritance expectations considerably. Patricia slid 2 more pages across the desk. They were screenshots of text messages between Amber and a woman named Denise, who appeared to be a close friend. The messages were from 8 months ago, approximately 6 weeks after Amber met Daniel. One message from Amber read, "He's sweet and completely devoted already. Dad confirmed the property and the firm are paid off free and clear. No debt. Probably sitting on 2+ mil when you add everything up." Denise replied with a champagne glass emoji. Another message, 3 weeks later. The mom is already dead, so there's no interference there. The dad is the only variable. Need to manage that situation carefully. I read that last message 3 times. I set the paper down and looked out Patricia's window at the street below where 2 teenagers were sitting on a curb eating sandwiches, and I felt a grief so particular and so quiet that I could not have named it in that moment if someone had asked me to. My son's mother had been dead for 8 years. She was described, in a text message between 2 women comparing asset portfolios, as a variable that had already been eliminated. I thanked Patricia. I paid her invoice. I drove home, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without doing anything. Then I called my attorney. His name is Douglas, and he has handled my legal affairs for 20 years. I told him everything. He listened carefully, and when I was done, he said 2 things. First, that the text messages, depending on how they had been obtained, may or may not be usable in any legal context. Second, that the most important thing I could do right now, before anything else, was to update my estate plan, completely, immediately. I went to his office the following Monday. By the end of that week, my will had been restructured. The firm's assets, the property, my retirement accounts, all of it was reorganized into a trust with specific conditions and a trustee who was not Daniel and was not anyone Amber had ever met. I did not cut Daniel out. I want to be clear about that. My son is still my son, but I built walls around what I had built over a lifetime so that no one could access it through him without his full, informed, voluntary consent after receiving independent legal counsel. Douglas also told me something I had not considered. He said that if I confronted Daniel directly with what I knew, there was a meaningful chance Amber would find out before I was ready, adapt her approach, and potentially manipulate Daniel into cutting contact with me entirely before I had the opportunity to present him with the full picture. He recommended patience. He recommended documentation. He recommended waiting for the right moment. It was the hardest advice I have ever followed. The wedding was scheduled for the 2nd Saturday of September at a vineyard outside of McMinnville. Daniel had asked me to give a toast. I had written and rewritten it 7 times. I kept the final version short and honest. I said I loved him, that his mother would have been proud of the man he had become, and that I wished him and his wife every happiness. I meant all of it. I also, by that point, had made a decision about what was going to happen before the reception ended. I arrived at the vineyard at 2 in the afternoon, an hour before the ceremony. The venue was beautiful in the way that expensive outdoor weddings in Oregon in September usually are golden light, lavender still in bloom along the fence lines, tables with white linens set under a canopy of market lights. Daniel was in the groom's suite getting ready with his groomsmen. I found him alone for a moment while his friends stepped out. He looked handsome. He looked happy. He looked, standing there in his rented tuxedo, like the little boy I had driven to soccer practice and helped with algebra homework and sat beside in a hospital waiting room while his mother's body was failing, and I felt the full weight of what I was about to do settle onto my shoulders like something physical. I hugged him. I told him he looked great. I did not tell him what I knew. Not yet. I had made a promise to myself about the order of operations, and I kept it. The ceremony was short and well executed. Amber was striking in her dress. She said her vows with precisely calibrated emotion, enough feeling to seem genuine, controlled enough to seem composed. I watched her, and I watched Daniel watching her, and I thought about structural assessments again, and about how the most dangerous failures are the ones that look perfectly sound right up until the moment they aren't. During the cocktail hour, before the reception formally began, I stepped away from the crowd and sent 2 text messages. The first was to my attorney Douglas. The second was to Daniel. Daniel's text said, "I need to show you something before the night goes further. I love you. Please find me before the first dance." He found me 15 minutes later behind the barn where the catering staff were staging the dinner service. He had his champagne glass in his hand and a look on his face that was equal parts concern and slight irritation. The look of a man who suspects his father is about to do something difficult. "Dad, what's going on?" I handed him the folder. "Not all of it. I had prepared a specific subset, the two previous engagements, with their documented timelines, the text message screenshots, and a one-page summary Patricia had written that laid out the pattern clearly and professionally, without editorializing. I handed it to him and I said, "I need you to read this. Take as much time as you need. I will stand right here." He read it the way you read something you are hoping will turn out to be a mistake, quickly at first, then slowing down as the possibility of a mistake recedes. I watched his face move through several distinct stages: confusion, recognition, a kind of physical stillness that I associate with shock in people who are trying hard not to show it. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "Where did you get this?" "I hired someone," I said. "I know how that sounds. I want you to know that I kept hoping she would find nothing." He looked back down at the papers. He read the text message again, the one about the variables, the one about his mother, and I watched something in his face close, like a door. "I need to talk to her," he said. "That's your right," I said. "I won't tell you what to do, but I want you to know that Douglas has already adjusted the estate plan. Whatever happens tonight, whatever you decide, that part is already done. I did not do this to control you. I did it to protect you." He nodded very slowly. Then he folded the papers and put them in his inside jacket pocket and walked back toward the reception. I gave him 20 minutes. I was standing near the bar, talking to one of Daniel's college friends named Marcus, when I heard voices elevated above the ambient noise of the reception. The voices were coming from behind the main tent, where the bride's family had set up a small, private lounge area. I excused myself and walked toward them. Amber's voice was precise and contained, the way it gets when she is managing a situation. Daniel's voice was something I had not heard from him in years, flat and certain, and not asking for permission. When I came around the corner of the tent, Amber saw me first. Something shifted in her face, not quite fear, but its more sophisticated cousin, calculation. "This is between me and my husband," she said. "He is my son," I said. "You had no right," she started. "I had every right," I said. I said it quietly. "I am 63 years old. I have buried my wife. I have nothing left to prove to anyone, and she could see that." Daniel turned to look at me. His eyes were still wet, but his jaw was set. "The wedding venue is paid for," Amber said, pivoting. "The guests are here. We can talk about this calmly like adults and figure out." "Scott," Daniel said. "And Richard." He said the names like he was reading items off a list. "You ended it with Scott right after his father changed the trust." He paused. "You ended it with Richard right after his mother remarried." She said nothing. "My mother is gone," Daniel said. "You called her a variable." The silence that followed that sentence was different from normal silence. It had texture and weight. Amber's mother had appeared at the edge of the lounge area. Two of Amber's bridesmaids had followed. Everyone was very still. Amber looked at me. The calculation was still there, but something underneath it had cracked. "You have no idea what kind of person I am," she said. "I think I have a reasonable idea," I said. She turned back to Daniel. The register of her voice shifted into something softer and more urgent, an appeal rather than a defense. "Daniel, we have built something real. You know how I feel about you. Whatever your father thinks he found." "He showed me the texts," Daniel said. The softness left her voice. What happened next took perhaps 4 minutes but felt longer. Amber said several things in rapid succession: that the texts were out of context, that Patricia's sources were questionable, that I had always hated her, that Daniel was throwing away his future because his father couldn't let go. She was good. Even then, under those circumstances, she was skilled. I will give her that. But Daniel had read those pages the way I had read them, slowly. And again, and with the specific stillness of a person who already knows, somewhere below the surface, that what they are reading is true. He asked her to leave. Not the venue, not the wedding. He asked her, specifically and without ambiguity, to leave his life. He said it once, clearly, in front of 6 or 7 witnesses, and then he walked past her and past her mother and past the bridesmaids, and he came to where I was standing, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Let's get out of here." We drove to a diner on the edge of McMinnville. It was the kind of place with laminate menus and coffee, that comes in thick ceramic mugs and seats that have been recovered twice since the place opened. We sat in a booth by the window for 3 hours. Daniel ordered eggs, even though it was 7:30 at night. I had coffee and pie. He asked me everything. When I first became worried, why I hired Patricia instead of coming to him directly, what the estate plan now looked like, whether I had told anyone else. I answered all of it honestly, including the parts that were uncomfortable, including telling him that Douglas had advised me to wait, and that I had agreed, and that there had been many moments over the preceding months when I had watched him happy and loved, and considered the possibility that I was simply wrong. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked. "Before the wedding," I said. That was always the line. He was quiet for a moment. "The texts about Mom," he said. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. "I know," I said. He looked out the window at the dark parking lot. A truck pulled in, a family unloading themselves slowly. 2 kids, a dad stretching his back, a mom who had been navigating from the passenger seat. Daniel watched them until they disappeared inside. "She was really good," he said finally. "I thought she was. I thought it was real." "You are not foolish for having loved someone," I said. "That is not a character flaw." He looked at me then. "How did you know?" "In the beginning. What made you start looking?" I thought about that. I thought about the Sunday football game, about Carol's photograph in a box, about the dinner reservations and the shorter phone calls and the particular way a person sounds when they are being slowly redirected away from the people who knew them first. "Your mother used to say, 'I look for faults before I look for solid ground,'" I said. "This time, I think she would say, 'I looked at the right time.'" He smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that sits just on the edge of something more painful, and it was entirely his own. We paid the check and drove back to Bend. He stayed at my house that night, in his old room, in the same bed he had slept in through high school and through a fever the week before his first SAT, and through the night his mother died and the few nights after. I heard him up at 2 a.m, moving around the kitchen, and I came downstairs and found him standing at the counter eating cereal and staring at nothing. We did not say anything for a while. I put the kettle on. "You changed the will before you told me," he said. Not accusatory, just noting it. "Yes." "Good," he said, and he meant it. In the weeks that followed, there were legal matters. Amber retained an attorney briefly, and there were 3 letters exchanged about the cost of the wedding venue and related non-refundable deposits. Douglas handled it. It resolved without much drama, which told me something about how confident she actually was in her position when the documentation was laid out clearly. Daniel moved back to Bend. He's renting an apartment 6 blocks from my house. He came for dinner last Sunday, pot roast, Carol's mother's recipe, and he brought a bottle of wine. And we watched football afterward, and he fell asleep on the couch, the way he used to do as a teenager, and I turned the volume down and let him sleep. He started seeing a counselor in October. He told me about it straightforwardly, without embarrassment, which I found admirable. He said he was working through some things about how he had let the distance between us grow and why he had not questioned it sooner. I told him that the counselor could have that conversation with him, and that I was not interested in any version of the past year where he blamed himself for being deceived by someone who had made an art of deception. The estate plan remains as Douglas restructured it. Daniel knows the full details now. He has reviewed it with his own attorney, per my request, and he agrees it is reasonable and fair. He does not resent it. He told me, once, that knowing it was in place before any of the confrontation happened, knowing that I had protected it without waiting to see how things turned out, was the thing that made him fully trust that what I had done was for him and not for myself. I think about Carol sometimes when I look at him. I think about what she would make of all this, her son in his old room, her recipe on the stove, her husband older than she ever got to be, and still getting up every morning and paying close attention. I think she would be relieved. I think she would be angry on his behalf, the way she used to get angry about things that hurt the people she loved, fierce and warm and absolutely without waste. I think she would also make me drink my coffee slowly and stop replaying the parts of the last year I cannot change. So that is what I am working on. The ponderosa pines are dropping needles this week. The southeast corner of the yard needs attention before the first frost. I have my coffee. I have my Sunday dinners. I have a son who calls me on weekdays sometimes, just to talk, and always sounds like himself. That is solid ground, and I am standing on it.